Back here on Sportsline, we're going to switch a little gears here and talk some NCAA basketball. Got the bracket right there tomorrow night on this program. I'm going to fill out my bracket live right in front of you. We'll take any questions you have. We'll talk about any matchup you want. We'll do anything we want about the tournament tomorrow night, but I'm going to fill out the bracket live on the air, just talk through some of the games, have a little fun with it tomorrow night, because that is frankly what the brackets are all about. I do want to say that I think for the most part, the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee did a pretty good job with this year's bracket. I had everybody in the field except for one. I had Louisville in and I had Utah State out. The committee went obviously the other way with that. Utah State wasn't even apparently that close to not being in their bracket, but I think they did mostly good when it came to inclusion. I don't love the seeding that they went with, and I particularly don't love it because of some of the rhetoric they gave about what they were going to have to do this year. We obviously understand that this season was different. You didn't have as many non-conference games. You had none of those multi-team events early on in the season where you got a bunch of games against really quality teams, and you got to see a lot of how these teams stack up with each other, maybe how a league stacks up with one another. You just didn't get that this year. We understand that, and that is a disadvantage to a lot of teams. But because of that, the idea that you really never saw like Big Ten teams play Pac-12 teams or that many ACC teams play Big 12 teams and all that, and not a whole lot of mid-majors play high-level teams. The fact we didn't see that, it makes it more difficult to compare. And one of the things that Mitch Barnhart, who's the Kentucky athletic director and he's the chairman of the selection committee, said all year long, and everybody who was associated with the committee said it all year long, that they were going to have to look into the comparative metrics to really judge how good teams were, and especially when they got down to seeding, because it wasn't going to all be about the record, and it wasn't going to be all about the net ranking, because the net ranking this year especially was going to skew the big boys. It was going to skew to the high major teams in the major conferences because they essentially played an entire season against themselves. And so the records and the strength of schedule and everything like that were gaudy for those guys. And for the mid-major teams, it was paltry. But that doesn't necessarily mean that all the best teams this year were the power conference teams, and all of the mid-major, none of them were any good this year. None of them deserved any inclusion or any real thought about it. And after looking at the bracket, I just don't understand how they didn't use those metrics, or at least allow them to stand for more. Because I think the seeding they got wrong. I think there's a lot of instances where the seeding just wasn't very good. And I'm going to start in the Midwest region. The very first thing that stood out to me on this bracket, my mouth literally dropped when Oklahoma State was announced as a 4 seed. Oklahoma State had finished incredibly strong in the Big 12. I mean, beating ranked team after ranked team down the stretch of the season. Then they go to the Big 12 tournament, win 2 more games, including a win over West Virginia for the second time in like a week on a neutral floor after beating them in Morgantown. And then a win over Baylor, who is the Big 12 regular season champ and a #1 seed in the South region. And Oklahoma State ends up on the 4 line. How does that make any sense? Because you know who's on the 3 line? West Virginia, the team I just told you that they beat in Morgantown and then in Kansas City in the last week and a half. Oklahoma State has a better record. They have more high-quality wins. They have more wins against teams in the field. And they beat them head-to-head. Yet somehow, some way, the committee puts West Virginia as the 10th overall seed and on the 3 line, and Oklahoma State is the 15th overall seed and on the 4 line. How in the world does that make any sense? And just for good measure, Oklahoma State beat every team on the 3 line. They happened to beat West Virginia twice, but they also beat Arkansas, they beat Kansas, and they beat Texas. They beat every single 3 in the tournament. But they beat the 3 in their region twice in the last week. How in the world are they a 4? But they are. But the thing about that, and this is the problem with tournament seeding, which gets me so worked up, is when you blow that seed, yes, it stinks for Oklahoma State. They should be higher. They should be a 3. That should be easier. They should be able to avoid one of the ones, which, in my opinion, especially the top 3 ones, are in a class by themselves this year. They should be able to avoid one of those teams until the Elite 8. That's the type of season Oklahoma State had. But the other problem is when you grossly underseed a team like Oklahoma State, it hurts everybody else around them. The 1 seed in that region is Illinois. Illinois, I think, is the 2nd best team in the country right now. Gonzaga's the best, unbeaten. I don't think there's any dispute there. But the way Illinois is playing, they're better than Baylor right now. And I think there's fairly good consensus on that. They're one of the hottest teams in the country. They won the toughest league over the weekend in the Big Ten tournament. They've won 14 of their last 15 games. Their reward is to get the grossly underseeded Oklahoma State team in the Sweet 16, a team that they shouldn't have to face until at least the Elite 8. But when the committee screws up, it not only punishes Oklahoma State, it punishes one of your 1 seeds. And not just that, this whole region is screwed up. Loyola Chicago is 9th in KenPom. Talk about the comparative metrics. They said they were going to matter. 9th. That's a top 10 team in KenPom. That would be a 3 seed. They ran through the Missouri Valley. They win the conference tournament going away against a Drake team that's in the field. All the other comparative metrics say this is a really efficient, good basketball team. Oh, by the way, it's the same team that went to the Final Four 3 years ago, and everyone who talks about this team says they're better than that team was. They get an 8. How does that make any sense? I mean, I'm not saying they should be a 3, but maybe a 5 or a 6, at least a 7. An 8? Come on. And then they're facing the lowest seeded ACC tournament champion ever. Georgia Tech's got a 9. And if you know anything about Georgia Tech's season, they lost a couple of terrible games early on to Mercer and Georgia State because Josh Pastner didn't want to really run practice because he was concerned about getting all his guys together on the floor, and he just didn't know if he was going to get guys sick by practicing hard. And then it became clear, well, we either practice hard or we lose. And so they got back into it. But that's what people had to deal with in this season. They've played much better since then. They've beaten a bunch of really good teams. But that's just the deal. Anyway, I don't like the seeding there. There's a bunch of other seeds that I can complain about. But that is my one gripe with the selection committee. I'll try to rest it there. We're going to take a break. When we come back, I will get into my next gripe about selections with the NCAA as a whole, and it's about Belmont. We'll get to that when we come back.